Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video where you join me today at Triumph's headquarters in the UK to have a look at these two beautiful new bikes. It's the Speedtwin 1200 updated for 2025 and then the new RS edition. Now the Speedtwin 1200s have long been some of my favourite retro bikes to ride, so is this update enough to keep them right up there as one of my default recommendations? Well, in this video we'll go through all of the details with the 10 key things that you need to know. But before we get started, a massive thanks to Flying Eyes for supporting the channel and sponsoring this video. Flying Eyes make these awesome glasses that I'm wearing today, and they're made from their own special material called resilamide. Resilamide is super strong and flexible, and so that means they make them just a millimeter thick on the arms, and so they can slide between your head and the helmet really easily. Plus, the flexibility means they follow the contours of your head, and so if you're someone who wears glasses or sunglasses on the bike, you know, traditional frames, they really can become quite distracting with that headache that they give you. But with these, I barely notice I'm wearing them. They're just that comfortable. And they also have a range of shapes and styles and colors, plus some sunglasses clip-ons and things like that. So there should be something to suit all tastes. So look, do check out the link down in the description below where you can find out more. And you'll also find down there a discount code specifically for our viewers. Now look, I think the first thing that we got to talk about with these new bikes is the fact that you've got two models now, with this base 1200 effectively replacing the previous generation, whereas the RS, as you might have guessed, is more of a sporty, performance-orientated take. Now it's kind of interesting that Triumph have announced that now, given that the Thruxton, which I think was previously the most sporty interpretation of the Bonneville platform, was discontinued last year, and so you might kind of see that as a bit of a replacement for the Thruxton, especially with some of the accessories which we'll get onto in a moment. But before we get onto that, let's take a look at the new styling package, and although the general idea is the same with a bit of a aggressive forward slanted take on the Bonneville platform, if you start to look into the details, there are plenty of little tweaks all over the bike that just give it a fresh look. For example, down here at the wheels, you've got a new paired 7-spoke design. And for me, I really like this sort of wheel on a semi-retro kind of bike where you've got the convenience and lightness of cast wheels, but just with a little bit of a nod to the heritage inspiration, with those paired spokes having the smidge of a look of like traditional wire spokes. Moving up to the headlight, it's a little bit flatter, this LED headlight, so it sits closer to the headstock and it gives it a bit more of that snub-nosed, aggressive, sporty look. But then also with the surrounds and mounts and the yokes here as well, there's lots of detail gone into it. And that's one of the things I really like about Triumphs. It doesn't ever feel like there's a single component on the bike that hasn't been well thought out from a visual perspective. Back from that, we've got the new tank shape. And again, it's not a massive revolution versus the previous gen. It does have that overall Bonneville shape, but it's just being sharpened up with some straighter lines. You can see it looks that little bit more sporty. And it's also finished off with a new flip-up filler cap. As for the paintwork, well, you've got 3 options for the 1200 and 2 for this RS model. So the 1200 comes in red, which is a color that stretches right back in Speedtwin history to the first model. So there's always going to be a red, I guess. But then you can also get it in the white that you can see here in the studio. And then there's also an aluminium silver, which I think might be my favorite of the bunch. Now the base 1200s get a sort of 1200 graphic along the bottom of the tank there, whereas this RS gets the stripes and the RS just to distinguish the two bikes. And this one comes in black or this Baja orange, which I really do like, and I expect this to be a great seller. Baja orange is a color that Triumph have started to use again more and more recently. And I really do think it suits these more premium spec Bonnevilles like the Scrambler 1200 XE. Now you'll also notice some changes to the side panels and these air intake covers. I think the heel guards are slightly updated too. And they also say they've managed to shorten up the silencers again for that slightly more sporty look. And so overall, I think it's a really nice update to this bike that just pushes it forward a bit without moving completely away from what made it popular in the first place. While we're on the looks though, it's just worth mentioning, as you'd expect, if you're paying a little more for the RS, you're getting a slightly more premium finish. So stuff like the saddle has a little bit of suede on it, which is, you know, better looking, but also kind of practical in that it stops you sliding around so much. So better for more aggressive, sporty riding. But it also feels like they've pulled back a little bit on the finish on this base model just to separate the two bikes, with things like the mud guards, which are plastic now. They were previously brushed aluminium, and you now only get those if you pay more for the RS. And in fact, the distinction between the two models becomes more apparent when you start to look at the chassis components. Now, the general geometry of the bikes is still pretty similar to the previous generation. I think there's some very minor differences between the two, but ultimately it preserves that sort of modern geometry. They always say they tried to get the dimensions and handling of the bike to be as close as possible to like a modern roadster. So if you look at the numbers, they're not far off a street triple or a speed triple. But yeah, where these two do diverge is with the individual components and bits of hardware. And again, I feel like in some departments, this base 1200 has been downgraded a little bit. I mean, don't get me wrong, the suspension does look better. You've still got the Marzocchi upside down fork up front, but at the rear, some piggyback shocks that I reckon should offer slightly better ride quality than the very basic shocks of the previous gen. And it has to be said, they help the looks a little bit too. Down here on the brakes though, well, with the last bike, you did get some really decent Brembo M50, I think, calipers, whereas now you get Triumph's own brand calipers, which I guess are probably made on their behalf by someone like Jay Juan. Now, that's not to say these won't be any good. They're still 4-piston, radially mounted. I'm sure there's enough stopping power to make sure that they're up to the job, but perhaps there won't be just as much bite and power, and also they do look a little bit less bling. To finish it off, tyres on this one are Sportec M9 RRs from METZELER, so should be nice and sticky. And so overall, like I say, gotta wait to ride it, but it looks like a bit of a mixed update for this one with better shocks, but maybe slightly downgraded brakes. This RS model though, on the other hand, well, it absolutely delivers on what a lot of Speed Twin owners have been asking for, I think, and it really does look like a fantastic bike that certainly can pretty much replace the Thruxton. So not only have you got Marzocchi forks that are fully adjustable, so you can get them dialed to your weight and riding style and current conditions, but also you've now got some proper top spec Öhlins piggyback shocks, again fully adjustable, and I'd expect these to have a bit more ride quality and control still further than the Marzocchi shocks on the base 1200. Then for braking, you've got Brembo's Stylemas, which are one of their top tier products and should give you sports bike levels of braking. And you also get a Brembo radial master cylinder, which is both span and ratio adjustable, so you can adjust it to meet the size of your hands, but also the feel of the braking power that you get in. Tyres, again, are a touch sportier than the base bike, with these METZELER Racetec RR K3s. And to me, the entire package really does look quite tasty. This is certainly a bike that I'm really looking forward to testing when we're able to get a press bike, hopefully early in 2025. Now, the ergonomics are another place in which Triumph have managed to separate the two bikes with a slightly more relaxed position on this base 1200. The seat height is down a couple of mils from the previous generation, I think. Pegs roughly in the same position, but it's the bars that have gone up and forward, and the intention is to give you a bit more room, a more spacious riding position that's a little more relaxed as well. Over on the RS though, well, the seat is up around the 8-10 mil of the previous gen, but they've sort of canted the rider forward around that pivot point to give it this more aggressive position. So the bars are down versus the standard 1200 model, but no lower than the previous gen, but they have been shifted forward, and that's mean that they've shifted the foot pegs up and back by about 40 mil, I believe, which is quite a bit. And so it does feel, definitely with the foot peg position, quite a sporty ride. This is the area in which though you can make this bike a little bit more like a Thruxton, because in the accessories catalogue they actually offer now a pair of clip-on handlebars that are going to give you much more of that proper cafe riding position. It's available for both the two bikes, and you can also spec it with this single seat hump cafe style saddle. And so yeah, if you do both of those things, it's going to end up looking and feeling fairly similar, I think, if not exactly the same as what a Thruxton would ride like. The only thing I haven't seen is like a half fairing, which really did complete the looks of the Thruxton, but that's probably something you'll eventually be able to buy from like a third-party aftermarket manufacturer. Now, I think one of the key reasons why this has always been one of my favorite retro bikes is the engine. It's just got so much mid-range and shove that it feels really quite quick, especially if you're just riding at road speeds where you're not necessarily able to properly rev bikes out. And look, while it is the same 1200 high power variant of the Bonneville Parallel Twin with that 270-degree crank for a really nice note at the exhaust, they do say they've updated the cams and also given it a new tune to match. The result? Well, peak torque is preserved, which is a good thing in my book. It's still 112 Newton meters, which is really quite healthy. But peak power has actually gone up because it's able to rev about 500 RPM higher. So with the previous gen, you got 100 PS, which is just under 100 horsepower, whereas now you've got 105. And while I don't necessarily think this bike absolutely needed it, I think you'd always take it if it's there. And if you are someone who likes to rev the bike, or if you just occasionally need to hang on to that gear to make that quick overtake, you're always going to be glad that extra 5 horsepower is there. Another welcome update though in the engine area is that this bike now gets an up and down quick shifter, and it's actually the first ever bike on the Bonneville platform to get a factory quick shifter. Previously you had to buy and fit one aftermarket from a third party. So yeah, definitely welcome news. I'm sure it's going to suit this bike perfectly. The only thing to consider is that it's actually only available on the RS model. It comes as standard, whereas you can't get it fitted to the base model even as an accessory. The reason being is because of that different foot peg position. The fact that these ones are up and back gives them the space there to fit the hardware under the pegs, whereas this one is just too low and far forward. And so yeah, that's almost certainly going to be a major consideration if you're trying to decide between which one to buy. Now here in the cockpit, there's another significant change, and that's the dash. See, previously you got twin clocks, one with an analog speed counter, another with an analog rev counter, and then a small digital display set into it to give you some of the basic riding information and to be able to control the modes. With both these new 2025 bikes though, you've got their hybrid dash that has an inverted LCD at the top, a smaller TFT at the bottom, and it dates back to the Trident 660. That was the first bike to get it, but they've started to use it on more and more of their models, including the modern classics. Now I think this change might get a bit of a mixed reception because I will admit that I think the twin clocks did look nicer, but then again, I do really like the top part of this dash. It's very easy to read the basics like speed and revs and gear position, and also that TFT part at the bottom allows you to go through the menus and change the settings and stuff. And also if you spec up the Bluetooth connectivity module, it opens up phone connectivity like calls and messaging and the ability to control music and media, and also with the My Triumph app you can plot a route and get turn-by-turn directions. I do also think it makes it slightly easier to control the riding modes and rider aids, and there's been some updates here as well. Now one of them that's another little bit of a downgrade on the base bike is that you now only have a rain and road riding mode, whereas this bike, the RS, gets the full 3 that you got with the previous generation, so rain, road and sport. Again, that does suit the different personalities of these two bikes, but maybe a little bit of a compromise if you like that feature about the previous gen. Still, to offset that, there is good news in terms of the TC and ABS, because there's now an inertial measurement unit fitted to both of these two bikes, and that feeds all sorts of lean angles into the rider aids, and so now cornering ABS and cornering traction control comes as standard on both bikes. Now, do you absolutely need it on this retro style of bike? Possibly not, but it might be just that one time that it saves you that you'll be really glad it was fitted. Now price-wise, the previous gen came in at $11,995 I think for the most basic color option, whereas now this base 1200 comes in at $12,495 and the RS you'll pay a couple grand more at $14,495. Like I say, it's a bit of a tough one because I think there are definitely some really nice enhancements here. The dash is a good one, you've got a USB port up behind the dash as well, those lean sensitive rider aids, the upgraded shocks at the rear, and also the looks are fresher and you've got that extra 5 horsepower from the engine, but maybe a few little sacrifices like the brakes, the lack of the sport riding mode, and also some of the finish like the plastic mud guards. The RS, on the other hand, well, you probably were going to expect to pay something like that for a bike with fully adjustable suspension, the O-rings at the rear, the quick shifter, the Brembo style lemmas, and realistically that is somewhere around what you probably pay for the competition like a BMW R12 for example, by the time you've spec'd it up with similar stuff. Generally though, I'd say that is a bike that looks very, very tempting to me. The Speed Twin is always a bike I've been kind of interested in owning, and now I think it looks better than ever and it's almost like it's in its ultimate spec. As always though, I'd love to know what you think, so do let me know down in the comments below. And if you want to see my full video about that Thruxton Final Edition that I mentioned earlier, that this bike with the clip-ons you could arguably say replaces, then I'll put it on the screen screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch in case you haven't already. Also, do hit subscribe if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on MOTOBOB. There's loads of bikes being launched coming up soon, and we'll also be heading to EICMA to bring you all the new bikes from there. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next one.